So if there was nothing else then about AntConc, and we're moving quite quickly through the sessions here, so we may well be finished a little bit early. We're now going to have a look at a couple of online tools that will do many of these corpus analyses for you and will present the data in slightly more visual format that may be of use to yourselves or certain other learners who may struggle reading some of these texts and who prefer to see the output data in a more visual way. So Voyant Tools is a relatively new creation, I believe. I think I was informed about this for the first time last year, but it may have been around for longer. I'm not entirely sure. But it essentially works in very much the same way as SketchEngine and AntConc, except it does a lot of the work for you. In fact, it can present almost too much information. So part of what we're doing here in this session is to try to work out what are the most important functions, as opposed to trying to go through and learning them all. Now, you can see here on the screen, got quite a few different options here for adding text. One of the things I can do is just paste in the text. So I might have a go at that later. But for now, I would like to use the files that we've been using throughout so far. So that's that reading folder again. And just going to select all of these, press OK. And then that's going to upload the corpus into the software. Again, if you're having connection problems, maybe don't do this right now, or maybe wait a moment so that you're not all doing it at the same time, or have a go after the session. And that's pretty much done. So as I said, it can be quite overwhelming in the beginning. So what we're going to do is try to break down some of the main functions here so you can get a bit of an idea about how they work. And the first one I'm interested in is the summary function, which is down here in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And the first button that I'll show you is actually this little square with an arrow coming out of it. And what this will do is it will actually open up any of these 5 windows you can see here in another tab, so that it makes it a bit easier to read. So if I just click this here where you can see the cursor hanging over, I'm just going to press export. Then you can see that then opens up in another tab, and it makes it a lot easier to read. So the summary function has 16, it shows me here the number of documents, the number of words in the corpus, and the unique word forms. It also gives you some information about the document length, including the longest and the shortest text. The vocabulary density, and that is one way of measuring whether a text is easier or more difficult to read or understand than another text in your corpus. So that might be a useful way, for example, if you're working with low-level learners, to make sure that you haven't got a text in your corpus that's really, really difficult for them, and to try to make sure that most of your text in your corpus are about the same level. So vocabulary density is just one measure of making sure that you can do that. Words per sentence as well is another measure of complexity. So you kind of want to try to make sure that this number is standard across the whole corpus so that you can be sure what you've got. Now, it just so happens that the reading corpus is composed of different level text. So obviously we've got different level numbers as output there. It gives you the 5 most frequent words in the corpus, which are people, time, years, like, and world. And it also gives you this little bit here about distinctive words within each individual file, which may be of use. For example, in this file here, the words Gucci, Lulu, Todd, Shahrazad, and Lydia seem to be very important in that text, but not in the other text of the corpus. Or here, text 8, we've got percent, Mensa, draft, worship, and embryos. And those words are specific to those files and not the other files in the corpus. So quite useful, very basic information that you can use very, very quickly just by uploading the text that you've got and getting that summary. So within that same bottom left-hand column, I want to click now on the little option here, phrases. And that is going to give me my n-grams, basically. Phrases is another term here for n-grams. Now, for this one, the default length seems to be set far too high to be of much use. So you can see here that I've marked where the length ruler is, and you can adjust the length here by playing around with the ruler. So I'm going to set that to 5 from its current very high one. And you can see here now that that's now given me the 5-word n-grams from my corpus data. So I've got here a great deal of enthusiasm, a 65-year-old, a thing of the past, a 1,000th of a second, another student or your teacher. And again, if I want to see them all in a bigger window, I can just export that using that button that I had before. And that's my list. Okay. So we're pretty much done now with the bottom left-hand corner, summary and phrases. So now I'm going to go to the bottom right-hand corner where it's called contexts. And essentially, this is where you're going to get your concordances that you had before in SketchEngine and AntConc. Now, one useful thing is when you click here on the search bar, it will actually come up with the most frequent words readily clickable so that you don't have to input these. So I'm going to choose time, and then that will give me the concordances of time. I can also adjust the context left and right. At the moment, I seem to have 5 words, but I can grow that to a bit bigger to get more context, which is a very useful function. AntConc, for example, seems to give you about 8 words to the left and 8 words to the right. But here I can actually specify quite a lot of words of context here. And again, if I want to export that to a new tab, I can just click that little button there. That will then load that up in a new tab, and there's my concordances for time. And I can search for a new one at any time without having to go back to the previous window. If I don't want to choose a pre-selected one, I can just type whatever I want in here. And the word English apparently doesn't show up at all in this particular one. So I don't know, we'll put people. People. There we go. And that seems to come up in my data. So the bottom right-hand turn there, context. This basically just allows you to search through concordance. Okay. Now, moving up to top left-hand corner now, we have here your typical word cloud, which has been named Cirrus here. I don't know why they call it that, but this is the display that it provides you with, a word cloud. And then any of these words are also clickable. So I think if you click said, it will take you to the phrases that involve said. I can put the word said into here and get my concordances. So again, students may benefit from looking at the word cloud, and obviously the larger the word, the more frequently appears in the corpus. Now I'm going to select the terms function here in the top left. And this basically acts like the word list function in AntConc and SketchEngine. So here is my word list sorted by frequency from the corpus that I've constructed. And that's all right there. For students who might benefit from more visual cues, the links button is a very useful way of seeing the most frequent words in your corpus, but also how those words are linked together with other words in a more visual format. So people, for example, if I hover my mouse over the word people, appear to be linked to the other common words work, like, and think. Whereas years appears to be linked to old, ago, later. And time is linked to spend, machine, and day. And you can make that even bigger by dragging the context bar across. By default, it only gives you the very most frequent terms, but the more you expand it, the more you can explore the way that these words are connected. So here, all I did was I just expanded the context a little more. I can even do it again. And then here, I can just hover my mouse over any of the words, and then you get this visual cue then of how these words are connected in your corpus. You can also click your mouse and hold it and drag any of the words around if the links are not clear. So for example, if I've got too many links for the word people, I might want to drag people out. Or if I want to have people versus years, I might drag people out here, years over here. And you can see then that I'm kind of pulling the words that are closer to people over to the left. And I pulled the words that are closer to the years a little bit more to the right. Almost like a tug of war between these two words. And I can do that as many times as I like. And it's just a way of letting students play with the words in a visual way. Something they wouldn't be able to do with any of the other tools that we've had a look at so far today. So that's that function. Again, well worth having a play with. Another useful function is up here in the middle window now at the top. Just like before, we had the option in AntConc to go back to the full text. And you can do that again here in the reader. So remember, I was searching for the word said. You can see now here in the reader, the word said has been highlighted in yellow so that it makes it easier for learners to find that in the context of the whole text. Very, very useful there. Then I'm going to click on Termsbury, which is another really useful tool from this corpus. And I'm just going to export this so we can see that a little bit more clearly. So this is very similar to what we were looking at before, but it provides me with some more numerical information as well. And I can hover my mouse over these words. I can get how many documents the word appear in within my corpus, and the frequency is the top number there in brackets. And I can also see the words that that word is related to, highlighted in pink. And the darker the color, the stronger the relationship. So just like we had before for the links function, the Termsbury function is just another alternative way there of visualizing some of these expressions. And this can make life a bit easier for people who prefer to see the relationships between the words instead of trying to work them out through numbers or work them out through lists, things like that. So for younger learners in particular, can be a very useful term. I can reduce the number of terms if I like, if there's too many. I can add a bit more context. I could also look for the distinct terms, which are quite different from the top terms. So these may be terms that are not very frequent, but are very distinctive in this data set. Words that you wouldn't ordinarily expect to show up in a general English data set. Maybe asteroid, vampire, pizza. Maybe there's a lot of text about pizza here. Diamonds. And a lot of proper names like Erwin, Yulia, Naomi, Dennis, etc. So again, a very useful visual way of viewing the data there. Now, I'd just like to show you one other function here, and it's really about understanding the interchangeability of these different screens, okay? So for example, I've got here the trend window where I can see the relative frequencies of the terms said, because that's the term that I looked for before. So I'm going to put here in here, not English, what was it? People. People. And then that should change, although it didn't, the term here. So it allows me to see the relative frequencies across the different documents. Now that's all fine, but what if I'm not particularly interested in that? Well, what I can do, and I've tried to highlight this in a PowerPoint so that you can see it in more detail. It's this little button here that looks like the Windows button, okay? And what this does is it allows you to replace any of the tools here. So for example, I could replace this one or replace this one, but I want to replace this one. I'm not finding it very useful. So I'm just going to click here. And you can see that I've actually got the option to select all kinds of different tools. Now, we really don't have the time today to go through all of these because there's quite a lot. And some of these are more useful than others. I find the links one here very useful. Termsbury also very useful. There's other ones here like Loom, for example, which looks something like this when it loads up. There's too many words to go through here. Yeah, probably shouldn't have clicked that one. That one's quite confusing, but let's have a look here. Dreamscape, for example, what does that do? No, right, that one is quite complicated, and it's telling me about geographical information about where the words come from. So that's, wow, okay. Maybe that's telling me about some of the located words in the corpus. Okay, not particularly interesting, but one function that is kind of hidden by default and that I think many people want to use is the collocates function, which we saw already in AntConc and SketchEngine, but it wasn't available on this default view for Voyant Tools. So instead what I've done here, so I've just clicked collocates, and now here I've got the collocates of the words in the corpus. So years ago is the most, the strongest collocate within the corpus. Years old, people think, time, people. But then if I select the word, for example here, money, I'll try that one. And then I've got the collocates for money that show up here. Money, spend money, make money, money account, life, money, work and money. And I may want to reduce the context to 1. Worldwide, and so on. Or I can increase this to however much that I'd like to do. So again, you just click on the little kind of Windows button there, and you've got the option to select lots of different visualization tools, grid tools, and so on. But I find the most useful ones are context for concordance, summary, phrases for engrams, links, Termsbury, and collocates. But again, you may find some others more useful for your learners or for yourself. And that's how it works. So that's a little bit of a demo there of Voyant Tools. And remember, you don't have to upload files. Say, for example, you wanted to have a Word document. Just going to bring up something that I did before. This part here, maybe. This is from a student's work that I'm working on at the moment. I'm just going to copy, paste all the words out of that. Shove that into Voyant Tools, press reveal. And then it's going to do exactly the same kind of scans as before. But now all I've done is I've copied and pasted that text in, and it's giving me all of the same information based on the paper that I was writing there. So you see the most frequent words are language, learners, WeChat, learning, and English. And again, I can click on the links, like so. The Termsbury. I can extract the collocates again. And there you have it. So that brings me to the end of the demonstration there of Voyant Tools. Do we have any questions there about the use of that software? Okay. If there's no questions, we're going to take a little break here, and we'll come back at 10 past the hour, whatever hour it is where you are. And then we'll just very briefly go into the final tool, which I've been demonstrating for almost all of you in your lesson plans. But I'm just going to pause the recording here for a moment, and we'll take a break and come back at 10 past the hour. So just going to restart here. Hope you enjoyed the break and hope you enjoyed the demonstration of Voyant Tools. And we're just going to have a quick look then at the final tool for today, which is probably the most simple tool of all four of them, which is probably why we're probably not going to get up to the full hour. Probably only take a few minutes to describe the functions of this software, but then that's okay, because it'll make the video shorter to watch at the end. And we're going to go into Versatext now. Now, Versatext is really new software that was created by a researcher, quite a well-known researcher called James Thomas, and Vit Beiser, who was one of the people involved in the creation of SketchEngine and Skell. And it essentially works to make the job of analyzing your texts much easier. But it generally works on single texts rather than collections of texts. So if you want to work on collections of text, then it might be easier to use something like Voyant Tools or SketchEngine or AntConc. But in your lesson plans that I've looked at so far, you all had these kind of sample text that you'd extracted from various internet sources, stories and so on. So for example, if I go into the workshop text here and just try and dig one out, I'll take one at random, this one here. This is Nathaniel Reiser and Stanley's one. And I believe, as with all the lesson plans from this week, that we do have this extended reading here. And this is the text on why Indonesian people should value all different cultures, which I presume we got online, or if you wrote that yourself, I don't remember. This is the hortatory exposition text. So what I'm going to do is just copy and paste that text into Versatext. And there we have it. And there are 3 basic functions. So again, quite simple, quick and easy. I get a word count here at the bottom, 287 words. And then I can access the word cloud function, which again is a nice visual way of visualizing the most frequent words in your data. I can limit this to 10 words, the 10 most frequent, 20, 30. I wouldn't necessarily go to 100 unless that's something you think your students can handle. I'm just going to stick with the 50 for now. And I can search by word or lemma, which just gives you the base form. Remember, we discussed about lemma in last week's session. Or I can look at the part of speech tags. Now, a number of you asked me about what these are and how these work. And these are based on a universal set of tags that are used by corpus linguists around the world. SketchEngine uses the same tags, and you will have seen these in the search by part of speech function that we explored last week. And a number of you in your lesson plans were looking at specific things like, say, past simple, right? And or present simple. So for those, you might want to look at the different tags to bring up examples of those parts of speech. So for example, here VB will give me the verbs in base form, the present simple tense forms. It's actually given me B verb, that's it. If I go back though, I might do VBP, which is giving me the plural form, are, and then I can get into some of the other parts of speech here. Maybe VV. Present simple. We'll use it in infinitive constructions. RB, I believe, are the adverbs. JJ are adjectives. And then our nouns. Or if I wanted to do that a different way, I could click word and then click which part of speech I need. So if I'm only interested in the verbs, I will uncheck noun, adjective, and adverb. And then here, this gives me the verbs. And I can see the past tense forms, present tense forms, and progressive forms. Some of you were also interested in looking at things like conjunction. for example, and or. Prepositions as well that appear, of, for, among. So again, just checking these terms for the information that I need. So for kind of absolute beginners, very young learners, people with next to no kind of technical ability on any of the other Corpus platforms that we've looked at so far, incredibly useful setup here by just copying the text that we're interested into, playing around with the word cloud, and then clicking on any of these terms will take me to its concordance. Now, at the moment, the concordances are viewed in keyword in context view, where you've got context to the right and left. But if I want to view that in sentence view, just click sentence, and then it gives that to me in full sentences, which are easier to follow for younger learners, learners with lower technical proficiency, lower learner proficiencies. Very useful to view in sentence view. But if I'm more interested in the context that surround the word, then it would be better to view it in this keyword in context view, depending on your purpose for reading the concordances. So the last function of Versatext is the profiler. And in all of the lesson plans, I think except for one, which didn't have a text in it, I added in the output from the profiler. So it helps to explain a little bit about what this is and how it works. So at the top, you can see this little pie chart breaking down the parts of speech. Not particularly useful, but just good visual information. Then there are four kind of lists that get generated when you input your text into Versatext. The one is top 1000, which relates to the top 1000 most frequent words, I believe, in English. Then 1000 to 2000 is the top 1000 to 2000 most frequent words in English. Academic word list is based on Avril Coxhead's academic word list for how many words in your text appear in those lists. And then you have the text-specific words, which do not show up in the top 1000 or 2000 lists or academic word lists necessarily, but are particularly important in your text that you've uploaded. And you can also show, if you click the Show Counts button there, it will give you the frequencies. Now, these words are all clickable. So if I click people, it will take me again to the concordance for people. And you can see here that they're clearly divided up into noun and part of speech, sorry. So these are the nouns, these are the verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and so on. Now, you might argue that the top 1000 words are, as they're the most frequent, these would be the ones that are more likely to be encountered by learners. So you might say that in a way these words are easier than the words in the 1000 to 2000 list. So this is worth bearing in mind if you're thinking about selecting text for learners of a certain proficiency level, because if you have lots of words in the top 1000, then chances are your learners will probably recognize quite a lot of them. But if your text contains too many words in the 1000 to 2000 range, then you might think that text might be a little bit harder because those words are less frequent and therefore less familiar. So you can see the difference straight away, like nouns like people, cultures, reasons, parties, world, relatively frequently occurring words shouldn't be too difficult for your students to know. But then the nouns in the 1000 to 2000 list may be a little bit less frequent, a little bit less familiar with your learners, was like exchange, welfare, heritage, diversity, and so on. The verbs, for example, appreciate, preserves. So these are the words that if you're going to be giving these to your learners, you need to think about, will my learners be expected to know what these words are? And then how many of the words in the text are the learners to be expected to know? And that might help you make a decision about whether you need to keep those words in your text, whether you need to modify the text slightly to replace those words with maybe simpler, more frequent words, something to think about. And then your text-specific words are the ones that are probably really going to need quite explicit instruction from the teacher, certainly a lot more scaffolding to understand. But then these are also the important words for the text, so they shouldn't be left out. They shouldn't be changed. These are very important. So within the text that we got, which was about Indonesian culture, we've got words like Indonesia, obviously, unity, archipelago, which is what Indonesia is, nationalism, cohesion as nouns, things that are forbidden in Indonesian may be interesting, vulnerable, tolerant. Okay, so these are not words necessarily in the top 1000 or top 2000, but these are the key words of that particular text that the students should be expected to know or recognize as a result of reading this text. So then these could be the words that you test the students on. You can make different activities out of these words using your regular teacher skill set. So you can make gap fills, you can make flashcards, you can get students to query the concordances related to these words. So a good one here would be unity, where I've got 6 examples. Promote unity seems to come up twice. Preserve unity comes up twice. So, and the unity of the nation shows up 4 times there. So based on that, based on the reading of these concordances, based on the reading of the sentences, student says, what does the word unity mean? And in many of your lesson plans, when you've written the dialogue of how the lesson's supposed to go, many of you have said, teacher, what does the word mean? And then the teacher's giving this very long explanation that the teacher may not necessarily know what the word means either, but they'll just pretend that they do. Or they'll just recite this kind of very complicated dictionary definition of what the word means. So when you get that kind of question in your lesson plans, the idea is, okay, well, why don't the teacher says, the student says, teacher, what does unity mean? And the teacher will then say, well, why don't you go and find out? Look in the corpus, take 5 minutes to look around that word, then come back to me and tell me what you think the word means, and I'll tell you if you're right or not. And that would make the whole process a bit more fun, a bit more interactive. So, far as I can see then, that is pretty much, I'm not sure what the reference corpus is constructed from. May have to email James or send him a message just to get an answer about that. But otherwise, that's pretty much the main functions there of Versatext. So it's very simple. Input the text, generate your word cloud, find the words you're interested in, visit the profiler to find out the most important words separated by part of speech, and then use this information or get the students to use this information about any of the reading text that you plan to use in your lessons. So usually when we think of building a corpus or putting a corpus together, we want that corpus to be as big as possible. So for some of you, I've already been saying things like get 100 texts of this kind together, get 100 texts of another kind together. But if you've only got that one text to work with and you need answers in a hurry, something like this Versatext, very useful bit of software for giving you that linguistic information about the text that you plan to use. So that's pretty much the end there of the demonstration of today's software. And I'll just open up the discussion now to any questions. Sorry that this session wasn't as interactive as the previous session, but with everybody trying to use the software once over Zoom, that just wasn't going to work. So strongly recommend you try this in your own time. Just to summarize what we've done today, we've explored 4 different tools for building a corpus with a variety of related functions. Some of these tools are more involved or more technical than others. Therefore, you need to decide what is right for your needs and, more importantly, for your learners' needs. You need to consider the technical abilities of your learners. Do you need to go into the Corpus software and manipulate the data and produce the output for your learners? Or can you get the learners to do it themselves? At the early stages, the teacher will probably be responsible for controlling much of the software, for generating the information like the concordances, the word lists, the collocates, and so on. But then after a while, you really want to get your students to go and start doing this for themselves. And as I said last week, you'll find that most of them will just take to it, and they'll very quickly leave you behind in terms of what they can do. I got this again from my daughter this week, where she was listening to Microsoft Word reading the text aloud. And I just came over and said, "How did you do that? I did not know that you could actually do that." And then she just said, "You press that button there." And that was it. I did not know that that was even a thing. So your children, the children in your class, will work this out much faster than you can. Another bit of important advice, as I mentioned a couple of times during this session, consider the reference corpora. So not just the target corpus that you're interested in, but the one that you're going to compare it to. So that's in terms of extracting keywords and things like that. So in most cases, a small general corpus or a big general corpus like British National Corpus or N1010 or something like that, COCA, that'll be fine. But if you want to compare 2 quite distinct genres or registers together, for example, narrative text versus information text, then you'll need to have the 2 corpora set up, and one will be the target corpus and one will be the reference corpus. So think very carefully about what corpora you're going to use, but then also think very carefully about what you're going to compare those to. And then finally, and I want to stress this for anybody who's feeling overwhelmed or confused or otherwise about any of the information or techniques that I've tried to show here today, just try them out and have fun doing it. Do not worry if you can't learn all of the programs, tools, and functions that we've covered today. Experiment, play around, and then stick to the ones that you find useful or that you think your learners will find useful. And importantly, that in some way will help you achieve your lesson objectives, because that's really the crucial thing here. These tools can do a lot, Not all of them were made for language teachers. In fact, most of them were not. So the skill is to find the things within this software that will be useful to you as language teachers and that will help you meet your goals. So don't worry if you haven't mastered all of the different software, all of the different functions, but you will have seen over the course of this session things where you think, oh, I can do that. Or, oh, that would be really useful for that thing that I have to teach next week. Or, oh, my students have always struggled with that, so this might help them out. And as long as we've kind of got one of those things happening after today's session, then I think that will be very, very useful. So, okay, it's pretty much me. Now I'll just stop sharing the screen to get the bandwidth going. And just remember that next week we will then start to talk about incorporating Corpora into the lesson plans, and send me a mail if you have any questions. So now I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm just going to go through and try and answer some of the questions that people have asked. So, okay, where are we? So Urana says, does it mean we have to control the corpus text? If we control, there might be some draw. I'm not sure. What do you mean by control there, Urana? Could you type that in a new box there? Nilawata says Versatext is very practical. Yes, it is. Chrisanti says, thank you very much. The session is enlightening, which is great. Riser says, how to implement the use of Corpus to teach elementary students. Do you mean entry level, as in like lower proficiency level, or elementary as in younger learners? Can you just clarify that, and then I'll give you an answer either way. Shu Yi, I love AntConc and SketchEngine, etc., etc. Thanks for the demonstrations, very good. As always, for you, Amelia, always a pleasure. Chrisanti says, practice makes perfect. Jessica says, thank you, etc., etc. Okay, so Riser, yeah, younger learners. Now, where's my book gone? We wrote the whole book. We wrote the whole book on this. And my book, my edited volume at least, Data-driven Learning for Younger Learners. And I'm also writing another chapter at the moment based on this topic. So I don't know if I managed to share the PDF of the book with everybody, but I will send it out to everybody whose email addresses are, who gave me their email addresses, and so join the chat today. So you can have a look through at the different chapters of that. But just very briefly, I didn't see that. Well, obviously, it really depends on the age of the learners, because within primary school, for example, there is a huge difference between students who are starting at like prep or year 1, and then learners who are in the year 5 and 6. So it's like a world of difference between the technical abilities of very young learners versus learners who are about to go to, say, high school or middle school. So there isn't one kind of simple answer for them, but essentially many children have grown up using mobile phones, using iPads, so they're already very technically literate, and they can already work out most of the functions of things if they're shown how to do something. So it's really about getting them to understand how to look and read the different kinds of information that they're presented with. So teaching them how to read concordances for very young learners who might struggle with reading anyway might be quite difficult. So for that, you would really have to use data that was really specific for their proficiency level. So graded readers. And we find that also young learners especially benefit from visual information, and increasingly we are starting to see multimodal corpora now, where learners can see text and video and images together, because especially really young learners, say prep year 1, year 2, are still reading picture books mostly. So they're getting the information from pictures in the book and the text as well. So there are Corpus tools coming out in the near future that will allow you to see associated pictures with the text, and very young learners find that incredibly useful. So at the very least, I think you need to have some kind of functional proficiency in reading, and you need to make sure that the texts are leveled really appropriately for the students' reading abilities. But then once you've got that kind of worked out, and you've taught them the basic functions, like how to read a concordance, how to look at collocates and things like that, then build it. Once they've got that kind of initial literacy, then they will take to that quite well, at least in the experiments that we have looked at. Another way is to find other tools, for example, that kind of look like Corpus tools, but maybe aren't. So there was a chapter in this book which looked at like song lyrics websites, where you can play the song and have a look at the lyrics at the same time and find words within those lyrics. So that can be like data-driven learning, but not necessarily using, like, say, something like SketchEngine or something very complicated like that. So obviously the field of data-driven learning as a whole is mainly focused on older learners or university learners for the most part, but we are beginning to see now lots of useful studies and data involving younger learners, and hopefully you yourselves are going to contribute to that body of knowledge in the very near future. So we look forward to seeing what you do with it, rather than us telling you what you should do with it. What we want to do after this is to be following you into your classrooms and seeing what you do with it, and then seeing what your students do with it and how they take to it. The more data we have of that happening, the better. So it's a very good question, Ranga, and I hope that answered everything for you there. Okay, Urana just got qualification. We are choosing data carefully. Aren't we controlling the data? We cannot take any data we think to be useful. Yeah, so I mean, as we said, selecting the corpus data will really depend on your lesson objectives. So if you're doing a lesson on, say, a particular genre of text for, say, intermediate level learners, then you will go out and preferably find as many of those kind of texts as you can at that level. And one very easy way to do this is, for the most part, in EFL classrooms around the world, students are using textbooks. So one way to make that textbook come to life is to convert the passages from that textbook into a corpus. And that's a very simple way of making sure that you are controlling the data that the students are receiving. And I hope that answers your question. Otherwise, you can also email me with what it is that you mean as well. Okay, were there any other questions at this point? Okay, so if nobody has any further questions, then I'm going to end the session here. Thanks for listening. And next week is the final session where we're going to be discussing matters related to your upcoming lesson plan assessments. For those people in the audience who are not doing the lesson plan assessments, maybe what you could do is to try to look at lesson plans that you're making, or a lesson plan that you think you want to make, and then try to see where you might add in some kind of corpus activity. And then we can discuss that. So this session was all me talking, but the next session is really going to be about you, and you're going to be doing most of the discussion. We will discuss each of your lesson plan ideas of how you might implement the corpus, and I'll be there to check your ideas and provide some guidance and advice on that. And then I'd also like to have a discussion with everybody related to the country-specific issues that arise. So we've got people here from China, Bangladesh, Indonesia, obviously, Vietnam. Be very interesting to get everybody's opinions on some of the country or culture-specific issues that might make this kind of approach easier or more difficult. So as I said, next week's session is really going to be you guys doing all of the discussion and the talking, and I'll be listening to what your ideas are, listening to your concerns and queries, and then we'll finish off, and then we'll have a look at the final lesson plans, and maybe interview some of you and send out a questionnaire at the end as well regarding the training. So thanks for listening again, and wait for the email which will contain the instructions for next week. All the best and stay safe out there.
Yeah, thank you.